Country officially fell at midnight that night.
At midnight on April 30th, 1975, the country of Vietnam officially fell. While this was the end of American involvement, it was just the beginning of Lynn Riley's journey to assimilate into a culture outside of Vietnam.
Lynn grew up in the town of Nha Trang, north of Saigon. Her father was a famous marine biologist and government official.
If you have a degree, the world opens up.
Because of her father's occupation, her family lived in a lavish villa. They lived the life of the elite.
We had a cook, a couple housekeepers, we have a couple of gardeners, a couple of chauffeurs dedicated just to us. And the 5 villas had shared like a private beach and tennis courts. This is how elitist we were. My mom hired the housekeeper's sister, who was a couple of years younger than me, to be my companion. That was the life. I mean, we had everything that we ever wanted. My mom, who, if you thought I was a princess, she was more of a princess because she was a diplomat's wife. Her days were spent in Vietnam embroidering, playing cards with other women, consulting with the cook for the daily meals and also parties.
Because of her father's high status position in the government, her family feared they would be targeted.
The North Vietnamese, the enemy, had already stated that they were for the people, and the people, there's no rank, everybody's equal. That's communism. And anyone who's elitist, anyone who works for the current government, anyone who is in the military fighting against them will be executed. So that was sort of like a known thing that they keep repeating over and over again throughout the war, which started, by the way, before my lifetime in 1954. So I grew up with the war. I know nothing but the war. And because of that, we were scared, because you don't know if it's just my dad being executed and whatnot. Not that we wanted that, but or would it be all of us being executed? So because of that, we had to leave.
As the country fell, Lynn and her family were forced to move south to her grandparents' house in Saigon, closer to the coast. From there, they were able to make their escape. Because there was a 24-hour curfew, they had to sneak out at night, which was dangerous because anyone seen in public would be shot on the spot.
He explained, like when we had to leave my home, he explained that, well, guess what? Our turn is next.
With the formal government falling into pieces, the country went into turmoil. But because of his high status, Lynn's father was able to secure them a spot on a Korean ship on its way to France.
While on the boat the next morning, Lynn and her family heard a radio broadcast that the country had fallen. It took a while for the news to sink in.
It took people crying for me to realize the impact that, the country fell last night at midnight. And we will never see Vietnam again. We just looked at each other and burst out in tears. And that was the first realization that I was countryless, that I don't belong anywhere anymore, because it was no longer Vietnam, the Republic.
When the entire country did fall, it came as a shock to Lynn and her family, who believed that the South Vietnamese army, with assistance from other countries, would win.
Up until a few weeks before the country fell, we actually thought that we were going to win. We thought that with the American backing, with the French backing, we're going to win. There's no way we're going to lose.
Although they made it onto the boat and out of Vietnam just in time, the hardest part of the journey was still yet to come.
There were napalms and bombs like trying to hit us who were leaving. All my life I knew there was fighting. I knew the war is always around me, but that was the first time I felt like I could die. That the war is right here and I could taste it. Before, it was always on TV.
Although all the families on the boat had paid for a full passage to France, the Koreans took advantage of the situation and left them stranded off the coast of Singapore.
The Koreans left us to starve and, you know, hey, you're on your own. And they got really belligerent and they threatened to shoot, like my dad. People who were vocal, hey, we paid you money and you promised, you know, they threatened to shoot us. And it was ugly. It was constantly that back and forth of the animosity and the...
Once they got out of Singapore, they were given a choice between Guam Island and Wake Island. Lynn's mom chose Guam. After living in Guam for a short time, Lynn and her family moved to a more permanent location in a camp called Indiantown Gap in Pennsylvania. At the camp, English assimilation classes were held to make the shift into American culture as easy as possible for the refugees.
Lessons of how you can assimilate into the American culture and life and all that stuff. And then they have English classes for us.
From Pennsylvania, Lynn's family was sponsored by a family in California. But even with the English assimilation classes, she still stood out among other children in the community. Fitting in a new country had been one of Lynn's biggest fears since the start of her journey.
Like, worry the most was, how am I going to fit in? I don't know anything but being Vietnamese.
Lynn's fears about living in a new country turned out to be correct, and her entire life was flipped upside down.
When my kids were little and I finally read the story of The Princess and the Pea, I'm like, yeah, that was me. We were the only schleps that show up to school in more schleppy clothes, and we did not have wonderful, you know, clothes like the rest of the rich kids. I mean, second, I have to say, the second toughest part of my life is the prejudice, because I didn't speak English. I was dark as night because Guam, I'm running around in the heat, you know, I had hair down to here. I looked like, you know, some savage out of, you know, and I was wearing boys' clothes. And I went into 7th grade to an extremely rich school. I was one out of, including me, 4 Vietnamese students. I used to cry myself to sleep at night in California because the teasing was relentless. On the board, there was a cartoon of me with buck teeth, with tiny squinty eyes, with my name on it. And I remember I was indignant. I'm like, I don't have buck teeth. And kids were like, where's your kung fu? Get out your kung fu.
Despite her struggles, Lynn was determined to be as successful as possible.
I went from barely not understanding anything except for hello, how are you, I'm fine, thank you in one sentence. And then 12th grade, I was in all honors. And I graduated. Out of 800 kids, I was, 122. Hard for where I am now. So every day I strive to be up here. Not financially or anything, I just strive happiness-wise or whatever, I want to be up here. But at the same time, I look down and I go, wow, look at all these people. But I always think of, wow, you know, look at this. And so that the next time you will always say, oh, I had all that and I blew it and I didn't appreciate it. And that's the #1 regret I have.
With her regained status, Lynn realized the importance of assimilating into a new culture while still keeping the old one. However, she still has trouble balancing the two.
It's a great thing to assimilate and still practice your own culture. And I struggle with the 2 cultures all the time. I still count in Vietnamese. I still think in Vietnamese. Am I American? Am I Vietnamese? I straddle that and I stopped fighting it. I used to. The worst thing for a Vietnamese is to be accused of, oh, you're Americanized. But yet, a good thing for Vietnamese is, oh, you're Americanized.
Thanks.
So, are you afraid of ladybugs?
A little, but that's
No, no, here.
I'm like very bug scared.